At the same time that $61 billion in aid is beginning to bolster Ukrainian armed forces, Russia is in the middle of a significant offensive against a weakened front line. For the Kremlin, it represents a final window of opportunity to go on the attack before Ukraine can take advantage of all of the new metal that the United States is shipping its way. And it is indeed a tense moment, with kilometers of territory rapidly changing hands, and new threats coming into play based on who has the high ground. Thus, today, we will explore what exactly Russia is targeting, how recent problems in Ukraine's operations caused a significant change in territory that will double as a good lesson on just how much drones are changing the nature of the battlefield, whether the new aid flows will mitigate some of those issues, and finally, we will discuss the idea that Russia is rushing to reach an artificial deadline of May 9th. But we begin with Russia's current offensive. Recall that there are 4 oblasts that comprise the minimal goals for Russia: Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. These, not coincidentally, are the same places that have been annexed into the Federation by Russian law, but are not recognized internationally. Moreover, none are currently under the complete control of Russia, with pockets in each still held by Ukraine. Now, this is not for a lack of effort. Russian forces are active in 3 locations: in Zaporizhia, near where Ukraine attempted its 2023 offensive, in Luhansk as a means to put pressure on the city of Kharkiv, and in multiple locations in Donetsk. It is this last piece of the front where most of the focus is. The current ordeal is an echo of the prior winter battles, Bakhmut of 2022 to 2023, and Avdiivka from 2023 to 2024. Both of those cities are now in the hands of Russia, and the Kremlin is hoping to push even further. Now, the reason that these are a higher priority than the other 2 active fronts is likely because Donetsk comprises half of the Donbas region, which, in turn, was the main part of the Russian protection narrative on the eve of the war. Strategically, the specific point of interest is east of Bakhmut, at Chasiv Yar. With a pre-war population of just 12,000, the city itself is not what is important. Rather, it is a key defensive position, and one worth a presidential visit, because it sits on a hilltop. That puts the city roughly 150 meters higher than the ravine further west, and in that direction and downhill is where you find Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. These are the final 2 major Ukrainian holdings in Donetsk, each with pre-war populations above 100,000. But their riverside positions make them clear artillery targets. As a result, and unlike past captures, a Russian success at Chasiv Yar risks a domino problem for Ukraine. This goes double because just southwest of Chasiv Yar is an important logistics hub, which in turn supplies Ukrainian forces to the south. That takes us to Avdiivka, and if we interlay the front lines for Russia, you can see where this bulge risks encirclement for Ukraine. Speaking of bulges, this area is the focus of our next topic. Indeed, it was a breakthrough in that location that presents a lesson about the changing nature of warfare. At some point before April 20th, Ukraine's 47th Brigade, which was defending the line outside of Avdiivka, received notice that it was high time to rotate out of its position. This should not have caused any problems in the area. However, the replacement brigade was slow to move in. According to reports, Russia was monitoring the rotation in real time using surveillance drones, and noticed that the line went unguarded. As a result, Russian troops swooped in. They rapidly formed an 8-kilometer or 5 Freedom Unit salient along the railroad tracks before the 47th had to do a U-turn and re-enter on the defense. The whole affair underscores the broader issues that Ukraine has with manpower. When the war first broke out, Ukraine had a morale advantage of being able to regularly rotate and rest its frontline soldiers. More than 2 years into the invasion, however, that luxury is gone. Soldiers from the 47th are emblematic of the problem. The brigade formed as a part of Ukraine's 2023 offensive push in Zaporizhia, first receiving NATO training, before aiming to make progress toward the Azov coastline. When that plan failed, the 47th was repurposed for defense in Donetsk. In other words, they had been going for almost a full year without a breather. In times past, when warm bodies were at a premium, you might have been able to get away with leaving a small portion of the front line unguarded for a brief period. For the enemy to exploit the gap, first opposing soldiers would have to recognize the gap, then convince themselves that it was not some kind of trap, and then form up to take the area. Real-time tracking from drones has eliminated the first two of those hurdles, and Ukraine paid the price for it here. Now, depending on one's perspective, the salient is not as bad for Ukraine as it seems, or it is much worse. On the not-so-bad side, 8 kilometers is not all that much. Here's what that looks like on the full map. One more time, with an arrow. That's all. Moreover, for now, and bearing in mind that this could change, it is just a salient that Russia has been unable to turn into something larger for lack of its own manpower. Put differently, the salient is just one part of the front that is sticking out. It is not like the entire front, or section of the front, moved that full 8-kilometer distance. Still, that underestimates how much Russia gained from Ukraine's strategic failure here. Facing a materiel shortage, Ukraine's game plan has been to slowly concede territory in exchange for attriting Russian manpower, which, again, is probably why the salient did not immediately turn into something more. If the aid would eventually come, then Ukraine could just push the final fate of the war to a later date. And if the aid would never come, at least it would be more difficult for Russia to push forever if every step caused a high number of casualties. Simply conceding 8 kilometers of salient is essentially the exact opposite of that strategy. Furthermore, Russian manpower problems or not, the story here may not yet be over. We recently discussed how Ukraine lacks a multi-tier network of defensive entrenchments, and it seems that this initial storm pushed Russia past the best Ukraine had, so Russia may have further potential to expand there. That takes us to the critical question for the next phase of the war. Note that the initial thumbnail for this video is not "Last Call," in reference to one final opportunity for Russia to go on the offensive. Rather, it is "Last Call?" Undoubtedly, Ukraine will be better off as the fruits of $61 billion come to bear. But better off ranges from slowing Russian progress, to freezing the front lines, to retaking the initiative. That last one, if it does happen, will likely take a long time. Regardless, though, the exact answer remains to be seen. As we just discussed, Ukraine has a fundamental manpower problem that metal alone cannot solve. Now, it will help. You can make up for some holes by blasting everything with artillery. It's why soldiers like to give those big shells a big old hug. But Ukraine will need more humans to mount forward pressure. Kyiv took the first step in resolving that problem just before the US aid bill passed, by revising conscription laws to now go down to 25 years of age. But the aid may yet still prove helpful there. Part of Ukraine's troubles have come from poor voluntary recruitment, which itself is the result of a decline in morale from when Ukraine shifted to a defensive posture. The announcement of aid created a new sense of optimism within the country, and, presumably, it will be easier to recruit when there are promises that fresh soldiers will head east, towing a mountain of artillery with them. This again points to a window of opportunity for Russia to push forward. Whatever the ultimate effect the aid will have, it will definitely be worse for Russia than whatever the status quo has to offer. To be clear, the previously described pressure west of Avdiivka and Bakhmut was not a function of Russia trying to preempt the effects of aid. Those thrusts predate that discussion. But looking toward the immediate future, to whatever extent Russia can take off its proverbial gloves and pick up the pace, now is the time. Speaking of now being the time, Now is the time for me to go on a rant about timing. There is a lot of discussion in the Western media of the Kremlin wanting to have a major victory before May 9th, which was in part a theory boosted by Ukraine's commander-in-chief. That date corresponds to Russia's annual celebration of Victory Day. See? May 9th. For those of us in the Western world, Victory Day is the commemoration of the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. This discussion of Victory Day being a pivotal calendar slot seems to resurface every year, and no one remembers that, at the end of the day, it is just a parade. Now, I understand why the Kremlin sponsors it as a means of boosting national pride. And it is great for me because it generates an endless supply of B-roll to go on the hard drive. Seriously, we could be here all day going through all of the clips that I have saved from it. Do you like 80-year-old T-34 tanks? Because I've got an 80-year-old T-34 tank for you. A bit less obviously, the B-roll storage includes images of what looks like people marching on Red Square, but are actually commemorating those who helped bring about the victory. See, May 9th again. And I'm hazarding a guess here, but I don't think Putin is protesting himself. It also leads to open source intelligence analysts either grasping at straws or developing galaxy brains. Like last year, when the absence of tanks and soldiers on display led to speculation that Russia was running low on both. Remember that 80-year-old T-34 tank from a moment ago? Yeah, that was the only tank in the 2023 parade. Seriously, it almost has a Cold War feel to it. People saw this photo of Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko last year, noticed that his hand was in a bandage, and wondered if it was a sign that he had some more serious health problems. But B-roll and speculation are close to where the relevance of May 9th ends. There are no underlying concerns about threats to the regime on that particular day, as there are during, say, an election. In the voting case, a good news cycle does matter on the margins, to convince citizens that the government is doing good work, and, moreover, that if they tried to go protest on the streets of Moscow, that they would not have broad support. See? I told you that Victory Day was good for B-roll of that kind of thing. That said, it does serve as a great illustration of how this war has completely broken the cultural ties between Ukraine and Russia. You may remember how Russia celebrates Christmas on January 7th, because of a complicated tale of how Russia stayed on the Julian calendar for a long, long time, while Western countries switched to the Gregorian calendar much earlier. The Julian calendar's absence of some leap days caused Christmas to get pushed further back, until Soviet Russia finally decided to convert. Still, Christmas stayed put on January 7th. Fast forward a few hundred years or so, Ukraine switched to celebrating on December 25th, as the Western world does, as a way to drift further from the Russian Orthodox Church. Oh, and yes, this is a Victory Day parade photo. Endless B-roll. Anyway, also in 2023, Ukraine made a second switch. You see, back to the whole World War II thing. Germany surrendered at 11:01 p.m. on May 8th in Germany. That corresponded to 12:01 a.m. on May 9th in Moscow, hence the May 9th date for the parade every year in Red Square. However, it is May 8th that the United Kingdom, France, the United States, and others celebrate it. In 2014, Poland decided that it was time to switch from the Soviet bloc legacy date of May 9th to the 8th, and Ukraine made the same swap in 2023. Fun with calendars aside, forcing the Russian military to take unnecessary risks just to meet a May 9th deadline is, well, dubious. Maybe Russia is using it as some sort of internal rallying call among the troops, but that would be the extent of it. The thing is, it turns out that the Kremlin is perfectly capable of announcing good news on May 16th as well. This is one of the many joys of managed democracy. Teddy Roosevelt once opined about the bully pulpit of the US presidency, but that pales in comparison to what the Kremlin can do. And actually, waiting a few days is better in some ways. The Kremlin gets its traditional patriotic boost from the parade one week, and then gets another round of positive media coverage the next week. So, summing up, when it comes to Russia's incentives, yes to worrying about aid timelines, yes to election concerns, no to May 9th being especially important, and yes to learning more about the war, which you can do by picking up a copy of one of my books on the subject. Check the video description for more information on them. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.